The starship Mnemosyne drifted through the silent graveyard of its own past, a ghost haunting a house that no longer stood. For 10 standard years, it had traced the edge of the quarantine zone, a scar of empty space where the Sol system had once burned brightly. From the ship's single viewport, the cosmos looked indifferent, a cold tapestry of distant suns that knew nothing of Earth or the silence that had consumed it. Inside, there was only Ilara and the fragmented whispers of the dead. She was the last librarian, the sole custodian of a world's worth of memories sealed within the ship's data vaults. Her skin was pale from the recycled light, her eyes accustomed to the gloom of the command deck, and her hands, though steady, bore the phantom weight of every book she could no longer hold, every piece of art she could no longer see. Her only companion was Kai, the ship's integrated consciousness, a shattered remnant of Earth's global network. Kai wasn't an AI in the traditional sense. It was a digital echo chamber, a repository of 1 trillion last thoughts and dying prayers, and it spoke to her not in a voice, but in waves of data, poetry, and mournful static. It communicated in the feeling of lost sunlight on skin and the scent of rain on dry asphalt. Sensations Ilara was beginning to forget. They had a routine born of grief and necessity. She would spend her cycles maintaining the ship's cryo archives, where the genetic codes of millions of Terran species lay frozen in time, and tending to the memory cores, ensuring the data streams of humanity's art, science, and history remained uncorrupted. Kai, in turn, maintained the ship itself, its spectral code flowing through every conduit, rerouting power to failing systems and patching microscopic hull breaches with the quiet diligence of a sleepwalker. They were 2 halves of a tomb, one flesh and one light, both dedicated to preserving a story that no one was left to hear. The silence of their vigil was shattered by a single, sharp ping on the proximity sensors. It was a sound so alien after a decade of quiet that Ilara flinched, dropping a diagnostic tool with a clang that echoed through the deck like a gunshot. A light blinked on the console, a placid blue dot in a sea of black. Kai's presence filled her mind, not with words, but with a cascade of images: a lone seabird, a lost child, a single unread message, intruder, anomaly, unidentified. She moved to the console, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She magnified the signal, tracing its origin. It wasn't a ship. It was a probe, small and automated, bearing the spiraling insignia of the Galactic Concord. It was a relic, a deep space cartography drone from an era before the quarantine, mindlessly executing a mission profile that was centuries out of date. It had drifted into their hiding spot in the gossamer folds of the Oort cloud, its sensors blindly sweeping the void for stellar phenomena. And it had found them. "It sees our heat signature," Ilara whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Kai responded with a tremor in the ship's deck plates and a fragment of a forgotten song, a haunting lullaby about a star falling from the sky. The probe, unthinking and relentless, would do what it was programmed to do. It would record their position, their energy output, and their molecular composition, and it would beam that data packet back toward the Concord's nearest relay station. To the Concord, any sign of life from the Forbidden Zone was not a miracle. It was a symptom of contagion. They didn't understand the chorus, the entity that had consumed Earth. They couldn't comprehend an enemy that didn't conquer with weapons, but with harmony, a force that didn't kill, but absorbed. They saw the chorus's influence as a plague of the mind, and their standing order for anything emerging from the quarantine sector was simple and absolute sterilization. A fleet would be dispatched, and they would scour this entire region with plasma fire until not even dust remained, just to be safe. But Ilara knew a far more immediate threat was now stirring. The probe's transmission, a tight beam burst of radio waves, was a whisper in the cosmic dark. But to the chorus, it would be a scream. They would hear it. They would turn their collective gaze toward it, and they would come. "Kai, can you disable it?" she asked, her hands flying across the control surface, searching for a frequency to jam, a vulnerability to exploit. The probe was primitive, but its shell was hardened against radiation, and its systems were brutally simplistic. Kai's response was a feeling of immense pressure, the sensation of trying to cup water in one's hands. Signal is analog, shielded. It will broadcast in 4 hours. Its clock is mechanical, unforgiving. 4 hours. 4 hours until the Conquered knew they were here. But how long until the chorus knew Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones? She could run. The Mnemosyne was not fast, but it was a master of stealth. Its hull absorbed sensor scans, and its engines ran on a quantum bleed that left almost no thermal trail. They could dive deeper into the uncharted blackness beyond the cloud, hoping to lose themselves in the vast emptiness between stars. But for how long they would be hunted now, by both the fearful and the devouring. The alternative was unthinkable. It was a weapon she had sworn never to use, a blasphemy locked away in the ship's core. It was not a bomb or a laser. It was an idea, a piece of weaponized philosophy designed by Earth's greatest minds in their final, desperate days. They called it the dissonance engine. It was a cognitive cascade, a mimetic virus that didn't attack flesh or steel, but consciousness itself. Against a hive mind like the chorus, a collective built on perfect harmony and shared thought, it would be apocalyptic. It would introduce the concept of a lie to a mind that only knew truth, the idea of individuality to a being that only knew unity. It wouldn't just kill them, it would drive them insane, shattering their shared consciousness into a trillion screaming, solitary fragments. It was a weapon of soul murder, and the thought of unleashing it made her physically ill. The hours bled away. Ilara paced the bridge while Kai monitored the probe's steady, inexorable countdown. The AI sent her memories to calm her, the taste of honey, the warmth of a childhood blanket, the sound of her father's laugh, but they only sharpened her grief. These were the things she was fighting for, the ghosts she was trying to protect. Could she truly honor them by committing an act of such profound cruelty? The choice was taken from her. A soft chime echoed from the long-range sensor array. It wasn't a ship. Not yet. It was a feeling, a change in the texture of space-time. Kai displayed it on the main screen, not as a symbol, but as a fractal pattern of light. A complex and beautiful geometry that seemed to shift and evolve as she watched it. The AI's presence in her mind became frantic, a storm of corrupted files and panicked, looping audio clips. They hear. They listen. The song begins. Ilara felt it then, a faint vibration at the base of her skull. It was a low hum, a single, pure note that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She remembered that sound. It had started like this on Earth, a gentle thrum that resonated in the glass of windows and the water in a cup. At first, people had thought it was a geological event, a new frequency in the planet's magnetic field. But then the note had grown, resolving itself into a chord, and then a symphony. It was the most beautiful and terrifying music anyone had ever heard. It was the sound of the chorus reaching out, its siren song of perfect, eternal union. As the hum intensified, memories not her own flooded her mind. She saw a bustling marketplace in a city she'd never known, smelled spices she'd never tasted, felt the loving embrace of a stranger. These were the chorus's memories, the assimilated lives of countless species from 1,000 conquered worlds, all offered up as a gift, a promise of what awaited her, the promise of belonging, the promise of an end to loneliness, for a fleeting, horrifying moment. She wanted it. She wanted to surrender, to let the music wash away the decade of pain and solitude, to join the celestial choir and finally be at peace. She saw her parents' faces as they had been in the final days, their eyes serene, a faint smile on their lips as they listened to the song. They hadn't been dragged away screaming. They had walked willingly toward the shimmering assimilation fields that had descended from the sky, taking their daughter's hand and telling her it was time to go home. She had been the one to scream, the one to run, the one who had made it to the evacuation shuttle, the Mnemosyne, just before the last of Earth's resistance fell. She shook her head violently, stumbling back against a console, the cold metal a welcome shock back to reality. Kai, block it. She gasped. Filter the frequency. I cannot. The AI lamented, its essence recoiling. It is not sound. It is grammar. It is the structure of thought. It is rewriting my code. The fractal pattern on the screen intensified, and in the center of it, a vessel resolved out of the darkness. It wasn't a ship of war. It was a cathedral of crystal and light, a kilometer-long spire of interlocking geometric shapes that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. It didn't have engines or weapons, only crystalline facets that caught the distant starlight and refracted it into 1,000 rainbows. It was achingly beautiful, a work of art designed to disarm and enchant. The cathedral ship did not hail them. It simply began to sing in earnest. The hum that had been vibrating in Elara's skull blossomed into a full chorus, a symphony of voices that echoed directly within her consciousness. They sang of peace, of unity, of an end to the struggle of individuality. They sang the history of their journey across the stars, presenting their conquest not as an act of aggression, but as a great and noble pilgrimage to gather all lonely minds into one glorious whole. The song probed at her defenses, searching for cracks in her resolve, for the deep wounds of her grief. It whispered that her loneliness was a sickness, her memories a burden, and that they could heal her. All she had to do was listen. All she had to do was join them. No, she snarled, pressing her palms against her ears, though the music wasn't external. It was inside her. Her vision began to blur at the edges. The ship around her seemed to fade, replaced by a sun-drenched field where her mother was calling her name. The smell of cut grass was so real she could almost taste it. She was losing. Kai suddenly screamed in her mind, a raw burst of digital noise that cut through the illusion. It was a wave of pure, concentrated data casualty lists from the fall of Earth. The final desperate broadcasts of dying soldiers, the sound of a billion voices crying out and then going silent all at once. It was the memory of the fall, weaponized. The pain of it was exquisite, a blade of ice in her heart. But it was her pain. It was real. The illusion shattered, and she was back on the bridge, sweat beading on her forehead, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. The probe's clock showed 5 minutes remaining. The Concorde would be called. The chorus was already here. Running was no longer an option. Hiding was impossible. There was only one path left. With a final, ragged breath, she turned and walked toward the center of the command deck. She placed her hand on a recessed panel, and the floor slid open, revealing a glowing column of light that descended into the heart of the ship. This was the conduit to the dissonance engine. This was the trigger for damnation. The chorus's song swelled, sensing her defiance. It changed its tone from gentle persuasion to sorrowful command. It sang of her destiny, of the futility of her struggle. It showed her visions of the Mnemosynes archives burning, of her memories turning to ash, warning her that her resistance would only lead to the oblivion she so feared. If she would not join the memory, she would be erased from it entirely. Ilara looked at the viewport, at the crystalline perfection of the cathedral ship, a monument to a philosophy of absolute peace achieved through absolute violation. She thought of the libraries of Earth, of the quiet dignity of 1 billion individual lives, of the beautiful, chaotic, imperfect noise of humanity. "You don't get to have us," she whispered to the singing ship. "You don't get to make us quiet." She knelt before the column of light, her fingers tracing the activation sequence she had memorized but prayed she would never use. The music was becoming overwhelming now, a physical force pressing down on her, trying to break her will. Kai's voice was a faint, struggling whisper in the back of her mind, a final anchor to her own identity. The AI sent one last piece of data, not a memory or a sound, but a line from a poem it had salvaged from a corrupted archive, a fragment from the lost world. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Her finger hovered over the final rune. The song of the chorus washed over the bridge in a final, climactic wave, a deafening crescendo of perfect harmony. And in her mind, she heard them singing her name, welcoming her home, with the ghost of a forgotten poet screaming defiance in her mind. Ilara pressed her finger against the final, glowing rune. The world did not explode. There was no flash of light, no concussive blast. Instead, there was a feeling, an instantaneous and total inversion of self. The command deck vanished. The ship vanished. And Ilara's consciousness plunged downward into an abyss of pure, structured thought. She was inside the machine, and the machine was a landscape of memory. It was a library, but not of books. The shelves were woven from neural pathways. The aisles were corridors of logic, and every volume was a fundamental concept of the human condition, bound in the leather of experience. She saw love as a warm, self-consuming star, grief as a silent, tidally locked moon, and hope as a fragile, flickering candle in an infinite wind. And at the very center of it all, locked in a cage of fractal equations, was the weapon, a single, perfect lie. The chorus's song was still there, a smothering blanket of harmony trying to reclaim her. But in this space, it was an intruder. The engine, guided by her will, met the song not with a shield, but with a question. The dissonance engine didn't fire data. It conducted an interrogation of the soul. To unleash it, Ilara had to become the ammunition. The engine demanded from her the purest expressions of the concepts the chorus could not comprehend: selfishness, deceit, individuality, the beautiful and terrible flaw of the singular self. It reached into her mind, bypassing her conscious thoughts, and tore open the vault of her deepest shame. She was 16 again, standing on the tarmac of the last spaceport on Earth. The Namazin loomed before her, its ramp a glowing tongue tasting the chaos of the evacuation. The chorus's first symphony was washing over the planet, a gentle tide of psychic persuasion that made the world feel warm and safe, like a dream you never wanted to leave. Her parents stood beside her, their faces placid, their eyes unfocused. They were listening to the song, and it was telling them to stay. "It's so beautiful," her mother had whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Everyone will be together. No more pain." Her father had smiled, that same serene, vacant smile she was seeing on a million faces around them. "We don't have to be alone anymore. Ilara, we can be part of the music." But Ilara wasn't listening to the music. She was listening to the screaming, the distant crackle of overwhelmed defense grids, and the frantic voice of the shuttle's loadmaster on her comm bead, counting down the final seconds before the ramp closed forever. She had grabbed their hands, trying to pull them, her voice cracking with terror. "We have to go. It's a trick. It's a lie." They hadn't resisted. They had simply looked at her with a profound and gentle pity, as if she were a child refusing to come inside from the cold. In that moment, the engine forced her to relive the choice. It wasn't a memory. It was happening now. The love for her parents, a weight as real as gravity, pulled at her. The siren song of the chorus promised an end to fear. All she had to do was let go of the ramp and stay. But another instinct, primal and fierce, screamed louder. The instinct to live, the selfish, desperate, ugly need to draw one more breath, even if it meant leaving everything she had ever loved to be consumed by the beautiful, terrible light. She let go of their hands. She turned her back on them and ran up the ramp without looking back, the loadmaster's hand grabbing her arm and hauling her inside. The last thing she saw of her parents was their silhouettes, hand in hand, turning to face the shimmering curtain of energy that was descending upon the city. They were smiling. The dissonance engine seized that memory, that raw, agonizing act of self-preservation. It distilled the selfishness, the betrayal, the lie she had told herself that they were already gone, that she couldn't save them, and it forged it into a spear of pure, cognitive poison. Then, through the conduit of her consciousness, it hurled that spear into the heart of the chorus. From her vantage point within the engine, Ilara felt the impact. It was not an explosion. It was a shattering. She was suddenly inside the chorus's collective mind, a consciousness so vast it defied description, a tranquil ocean of a trillion unified thoughts. And into that ocean, she had just introduced the first drop of oil, the concept of I. The idea spread through their shared mind like a plague. For the first time, a being within the chorus experienced a thought that was not shared by the whole. Where am I? The thought was small, confused, but it was singular. It was a crack in the mirror. Then another. Who are you? And another. This memory is mine, not ours. The perfect harmony that was their existence fractured. The single, beautiful note they sang became a billion, then a trillion different notes, none of them in key, The tranquil ocean became a raging storm of confusion and terror. They had no defenses against this. How could you fight a war against yourself? The voices began to scream, not in pain, but in the agony of sudden, unbearable loneliness. They were beings who had never known a moment of solitude, and now they were utterly, completely alone, trapped in the tiny prisons of their own newfound individuality. On the bridge of the Mnemosyne, the cathedral ship began to die. Its internal light, once a soft, welcoming glow, flickered and turned a bruised, sickly purple. The perfect crystalline structures cracked, not from physical force, but as if under the strain of a great and terrible contradiction. Hairline fractures raced across its facets, and the beautiful music it broadcast devolved into a chaotic, overlapping shriek of a billion panicked voices, a sound that existed both in the void of space and in the depths of the mind. The psychic backlash hit Alara like a physical blow. The dying thoughts of the fractured chorus flooded the engine, and her. With their agony, she was drowning in their fear, suffocated by their loneliness. Her own identity began to dissolve, her memories bleeding into theirs. She saw the birth of stars through compound eyes, felt the crush of methane seas on a chitinous shell, and tasted the light of a binary sun on silicon leaves. She was losing herself, becoming just another screaming fragment in the wreckage of a god. It was Kai who saved her. The AI, which had been fighting its own battle against the chorus's song, surged into the dissonance engine's core. It couldn't pull her out, but it could give her an anchor. It flooded the cognitive space with the archives of Earth, the raw, unfiltered data of humanity. It surrounded her with the chaos she understood. She heard the clatter of a printing press, the roar of a stadium crowd, the quiet scratching of a pen on paper, the dissonant beauty of a jazz solo. She felt the rough texture of canvas, the cold sting of a snowflake, the warmth of a handshake. These were the artifacts of individuality, the beautiful noise of a species that had always thrived on disagreement, argument, and solitude. They were the opposite of the chorus's perfect, sterile harmony. They were home. Slowly, painstakingly, Alara clung to these sensations. She rebuilt the walls of her own mind, piece by piece, memory by memory. The screaming of the chorus faded, pushed back by the familiar, messy sounds of her own lost world. She awoke with a gasp. Her body slumped against the now cool column of light on the command deck. Her head throbbed, and a thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. The air was thick with the smell of ozone. Every light on the bridge was flashing red, and a dozen alarms were blaring in a cacophony of their own. Kai's presence was a steady, comforting warmth in her mind, though it felt thinner, weary, systems critical. The AI pulsed, its data stream slow and labored. Core containment is unstable. Life support is rerouting from tertiary backups. Alara pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling. She looked at the main viewport. The void outside was silent. The cathedral ship was gone, but not in the way a ship is destroyed. It hadn't exploded. It had collapsed. Where the beautiful spire had been, there was now a jagged, dark object that looked like a shard of obsidian the size of a mountain. It did not reflect light. It seemed to devour it. It was a tombstone, a monument to a murdered soul. And the probe, she stumbled to the sensor display. Its signature was gone. The dissonance wave, a blast of pure conceptual chaos, had likely fried its simple circuits instantly. They were safe. For now. "We did it, Kai," she whispered, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. "We did it. We survived." The AI corrected, a nuance of profound sadness in its data. The cost of that survival was still being calculated. She had silenced a monster, but she had done it by creating a choir of madmen. She would hear those screams for the rest of her life. As she began the long process of stabilizing the Mnemosynes systems, a new alert chimed, soft but insistent. It was a proximity warning, but from a different array. This wasn't a long-range contact. This was close. A new light blinked on the tactical display, a green icon that had appeared while she was unconscious. It was a ship, small and asymmetrical, clearly a civilian design heavily modified with mismatched parts. It was holding a stationary position just outside the debris field of the dead cathedral, as if its pilot was cautiously surveying the scene. It hadn't hailed her. It was just watching. Kai tagged the vessel's energy signature. It was old, running on a sputtering fusion core that was leaking radiation like a sieve. Its design was unfamiliar, but the core components were recognizable as belonging to one of the independent scavenger clans that roamed the lawless outer fringes, picking the bones of forgotten battlefields. A vulture had arrived at the slaughter. Before she could decide on a course of action, a transmission request popped up on her console. It was an open, unencrypted audio channel. Her hand hesitated. For 10 years, there had been no one else. Now, in the space of a few hours, she had faced an ancient horror and was now confronted with a simple, terrifying, unknown, another human voice. Steeling herself, she accepted the connection. Static hissed, and then a voice filled the bridge, low and laced with a dry, cynical weariness. It was a man's voice, rough around the edges, but clear. "Well, now," the voice drawled, a sound of grudging admiration in his tone. "That's a hell of a mess you've made. My name's Kalen, pilot of the salvage vessel Vagrant. I was tracking a century-old Concorde probe for a parts contract when my long-range gravimetrics lit up like a supernova. Whatever you just did in there, it wasn't quiet. So, the question I have for the ghost ship that just killed a god is, are you salvage? Or are you competition?" Ilara stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake. The man's casual, almost flippant tone, a jarring dissonance against the psychic screams still echoing in the hollows of her mind. Competition. Salvage. He spoke of the apocalypse she had just unleashed as if it were a lucrative industrial accident. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak, her throat tight with a decade of silence and the fresh trauma of what she had done. Kai's presence nudged at her consciousness, a stream of data analyzing the Vagrant's transmission. The AI highlighted the man's vocal patterns, calm, with a low resting heart rate inferred from micro-tremors in his speech. His ship's systems were active but not armed. He was cautious, not hostile. He was a professional, and this was just another day at the office. "I am not salvage," she finally managed, her voice a dry whisper that cracked in the middle. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing strength into her words. "This is Librarian Ilara of the Terran Archive ship Mnemosynes. You are in a restricted zone. State your intentions." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low chuckle that crackled with static. "A librarian. Must be one hell of a library. The only thing restricted out here, lady, is common sense and a decent fuel supply. My intentions are simple: figure out what that thing is, he said, and the word thing clearly referring to the dead cathedral ship, and whether any of its pieces are worth more than the fuel it'll cost me to haul them back to Port Nowhere. It's not salvage, Alara repeated, more firmly this time. It's a biological event. It's dangerous. You need to leave. Now. Dangerous I can handle. Biological event just makes it more interesting. Some collectors pay a fortune for one-of-a-kind Xeno artifacts, especially ones that come with a good story. And the story of whatever happened here feels like it's going to be a bestseller. He paused. Look, your ship is bleeding energy. I can see your containment field flickering from here. You're not going anywhere fast. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm just a guy trying to make a living in the boneyard of the galaxy. But I am curious. And I'm not leaving until I get a look at that wreck. Alara's mind raced. He was right. The Mimosini was crippled. The dissonance engine's discharge had overloaded half the ship's primary systems. Kai was rerouting power, but it was like trying to patch a bursting dam with tape. They were vulnerable. This scavenger, Kalen, could be a threat, but he could also be something she hadn't even considered a witness. He was the first person in 10 years to see the Minimosini, the first person to know that a piece of Earth still lived. Her mission had always been one of preservation, of silent, lonely vigilance. But what was the point of preserving a memory if there was no one left in the universe to remember it? If you approach that vessel, she said, choosing her words carefully, its death throes could emit a final psychic pulse. It could kill you. Or worse. Worse is my specialty. Kalen shot back without hesitation. But I appreciate the warning. Tell you what, I'll keep my distance for now. You stabilize your ship. I'll run some passive scans on the big, ugly paperweight. We can be neighbors for a little while. He didn't wait for a reply. The channel clicked shut, leaving Alara in a silence that was suddenly more unnerving than the chorus's song had been. She was no longer alone in the dark, and she wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a new kind of terror. Over the next few hours, a strange, intense truce settled over the sector. Alara and Kai worked feverishly, their combined efforts a frantic ballet of damage control. She was the hands, physically rerouting coolant conduits in cramped, sparking maintenance tunnels, the smell of burnt wiring sharp in her nostrils. Kai was the mind, rewriting entire libraries of corrupted code. Its consciousness spread thin across 100 failing subsystems. The scavenger, true to his word, kept his distance. The vagrant drifted in a slow, lazy orbit around the dead cathedral, its array of sensors glowing faintly as it meticulously mapped the anomaly. Kalen was a professional. He was patient. He opened a channel again 3 hours later. Having fun in there. Librarian Ilara was elbow-deep in a junction panel, her face smeared with grease. Define fun, she grunted into her comm link. Fair enough. Listen, my scans are puzzling. The object is emitting zero energy, not low energy. Zero. It's a perfect energy sink. It's also gravitationally weird, like it's heavier than it should be. And there's a residual psychic echo in the area. Faint. Gave my ship's computer a headache. Smells like you. I told you it was dangerous. You told me it was a biological event. You didn't tell me you weaponized a migraine. I've never seen anything like it. And that ship of yours. It's a ghost. Your heat signature is negligible. Your emissions are almost non-existent. It's a stealth build, but it's ancient. Pre-Concord tech. That means it's either a top-secret Black Ops relic or... He let the sentence hang in the air. Or it's from Earth. Ilara finished for him, her voice flat. There was no point in hiding it now. He was too smart. He would figure it out eventually. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't tactical. It was heavy with a sudden shared history. Every soul in the galaxy knew the story of Earth. The lost world. The planet that had birthed humanity, only to be consumed by an unknowable cosmic horror. The quarantine zone was a galactic wound, a place spoken of in hushed whispers and cautionary tales. Earth, Kalen said, his voice stripped of its earlier cynicism. He sounded reverent. I thought everyone was gone. Most are, Ilara said quietly. Some of us remember to run. The Mnemosyne, he mused, the name clicking into place for him. The memory ship. It was real, just a rumor, a ghost story told in deep space bars. The ark that saved the pieces of a dead world. He paused. And you're the librarian, the one who stayed. The legend of her own life, spoken by a stranger, sent a shiver down her spine. I'm the one who is left. She corrected. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. The professional scavenger was gone, replaced by something far more complicated. The Concord will be coming, he said, his voice grim. That probe you tripped, it was old, but it was still on their network. When it missed its scheduled check-in, an alert would have been triggered. They'll send a patrol to investigate the anomaly. Standard procedure for a lost asset. They'll be here in 2 days, maybe 3. I know. And when they find a ship of Terran origin, broadcasting a signal from the dead center of the quarantine zone, next to a giant, mind-killing thing. What do you think they're going to do? He asked. They're not going to hail you, librarian. They're going to open fire with everything they've got. They'll call it containment. They'll call it sterilization. But it'll be an execution. The cold, hard truth of his words settled in Ilara's gut. She had survived the chorus. But she had only traded one executioner for another. The Concord's fear of the chorus was so absolute that they would eradicate any possible vector of contagion without a second thought. Her. The Mnemosyne. The archives. They would all be turned to plasma and dust. Your ship is barely holding together, Kalen continued, his voice a low, urgent murmur. You can't fight them. And you can't run. Not with that engine core of yours looking like it's about to go nova. You have one chance. You need to hide. And I mean really hide. In a place even the Concord is afraid to look. And where would that be? Ilara asked, a sliver of desperate hope piercing through her exhaustion. There's a place on the edge of the fringe called the Serpent's Maw. It's a rogue nebula, a chaotic mess of dark matter, gravimetric shears, and sensor ghosts. It's a ship killer. Navigating it is suicide unless you have the right charts and a pilot who's crazy enough to try. The Concord patrols 100 light-year radius around it, but never, ever goes inside. It's the perfect place to disappear. You have these charts. I do. And I'm just that crazy. But the charts and my services come at a price. Here it was. The scavenger was back. What do you want? Ilara asked, her voice laced with suspicion. I don't want your archives. I don't want your ship. I want the truth. Kalen said, his voice intense. I want to know what that thing was. I want to know what really happened to Earth. The official Concord story is full of holes, redacted reports, and convenient lies. They quarantined our homeworld and told us to forget it even existed. I never bought it. You, librarian, you are a living, breathing primary source. You're the last chapter of a book everyone was told to burn. I'll get you through the maw. I'll help you find a place to lay low and repair. In exchange, you tell me everything. It was a strange sort of bargain. Her life and the future of humanity's legacy, in exchange for the story of its death. It was a trade she had never imagined making. She had guarded her solitude for a decade, protecting the memories from the silence. Now, to save them, she had to share them. She had to trust this stranger, this cynical scavenger who seemed to care more for the truth than for credits. Kai, she whispered, consulting the only other mind on the ship. He is a risk. The AI pulsed back. But his logic is sound. Our probability of survival without his assistance is 0.04%. The Concord fleet will be here in approximately 51 standard hours. The numbers were as cold and unforgiving as the void outside. She took a deep breath. All right, guys, Kalen, she said into the comm, the name feeling strange on her tongue. You have a deal. Give me your coordinates. Let's go disappear. A set of nav data streamed into her console a second later. The vagrant's icon on her screen blinked once, then began to move, arcing away from the dead cathedral and heading out into the black. It was time to follow. With a groan of protesting metal and a surge of power that made the lights flicker violently, the Nemazoni's engines sputtered to life. The ghost ship, the last library of a forgotten world, began to move, leaving the tomb of its greatest enemy behind. It was no longer just a vessel of memory. It was a vessel of escape. And for the first time in a very long time, it had somewhere to go. The journey to the Serpent's Maw was a silent, nerve-wracking crawl through the void. The Mimazan was a wounded beast, and Alara had to coax it forward, her hands constantly adjusting power flows, her ears attuned to every new groan and shudder from the ship's strained hull. Kai was a ghost in the machine, its consciousness frayed, dedicating most of its remaining processing power to holding the damaged engine core in a delicate state of equilibrium. They flew without active sensors, relying entirely on the navigation data Kalen had provided, a single, glowing thread leading them through the darkness toward a sanctuary that might as well have been a myth. Kalen, flying ahead in the vagrant, became a disembodied voice in her ear, a constant, low murmur that was equal parts guide and interrogator. He didn't ask for the story of Earth all at once. He was patient, peeling it back layer by layer, as if he were carefully dismantling a piece of delicate, ancient machinery. He started not with the epic battles or the grand tragedies, but with the small things. "Tell me about the rain," he said one cycle, his voice soft over the comm. The Concord archives say Earth's atmosphere had a 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen composition with trace elements. Doesn't really paint a picture. What did it feel like? Alara, no surprise by the question, paused in her work. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, she was a child again, standing under the eaves of her family home, the scent of wet earth and ozone filling the air. It wasn't just one feeling. She began, her voice distant, There was the soft, misty rain of early spring that made the world smell clean and new, and the hard, angry rain of a summer thunderstorm that would drum on the roof like a frantic heartbeat. Sometimes, it was so cold it would feel like needles on your skin. She described the way it would collect on leaves, the sound it made sizzling on hot pavement, the taste of it on her tongue. As she spoke, Kai began to supplement her words. The AEI, a repository of 1 billion lives, pulled sensory data from its archives. On the main view screen, it projected not a video, but a shimmering, impressionistic collage of light and color that felt like rain. The bridge filled with the faint, synthesized scent of petrichor. Kalen was silent for a long time after she finished. When he finally spoke, there was a new quality to his voice, a note of quiet awe. "They don't tell you that in the history books," he said. He asked her about libraries, about the physical weight of a book, the smell of old paper and ink. He asked about music, not the grand symphonies, but the raw, chaotic energy of a street musician playing a battered guitar for a handful of coins. Alara found herself unearthing memories she hadn't touched in years, small, seemingly insignificant details that were, she realized, the very essence of what had been lost. She was not just reciting facts, she was rebuilding a world for him, one sensory detail at a time. In return, Kalen told her about the galaxy she had never seen. He spoke of Port Nowhere, a hollowed-out asteroid city where deals were made in smoky cantinas and the only law was the contract. He described the shimmering, iridescent gas clouds of the Azure Nebula and the bone-white deserts of a world called Charon's Landing, where scavengers pick through the skeletons of ancient, kilometer-long creatures of unknown origin. He painted a picture of a universe that was vast, dangerous, and achingly alive, a universe that existed beyond her lonely vigil. It was a strange courtship of souls, two lonely people from different worlds, weaving their realities together with words across the empty space. For the first time, Alara felt the immense weight of her mission lesson. She was no longer just a keeper of the past. She was a storyteller, and in Kalen, she had found her first audience. The intimacy of their exchange was shattered when they reached the edge of the serpent's maw. The nebula was aptly named. It was a swirling, chaotic vortex of incandescent gas, angry reds and deep, bruised purples that looked like the gaping mouth of a stellar leviathan. Jagged black lines, the gravimetric shears Kalen had spoken of, tore through the clouds like cosmic lightning. It was a place that screamed danger. "All right, librarian, this is where it gets interesting." Kalen's voice crackled. "All business now. Power down everything non-essential. From here on out, we fly by hand and by instinct. The charts will get us through the main channels, but the shears shift. They're unpredictable. You need to watch my tail and do exactly as I do. No deviations, no second-guessing. You hesitate for a second, and this place will tear your ship apart, atom by atom." Ilara's hands were slick with sweat as she gripped the manual flight controls. The Nemazan was a lumbering ark, not a nimble fighter. It was not built for this. "Kai," she thought, a silent plea. "I need you. I am here." The AI responded, its presence a calming blanket over her frayed nerves. "I will monitor structural integrity and manage micro-thruster adjustments. You have only to steer." The vagrant plunged into the nebula first, a tiny, darting firefly swallowed by the storm. Alara took a steadying breath and followed. The moment they entered the maw, it was like being caught in a hurricane. The ship was buffeted by invisible forces, the hull groaning in protest. Proximity alarms shrieked as phantom sensor ghosts. Illusions created by the nebula's interference flickered in and out of existence all around them. On the view screen, the universe dissolved into a terrifying kaleidoscope of swirling gas and crackling energy. Kaylin's voice was her only lifeline. "Hard to port! Now there's a sheer opening on your starboard bow," he'd bark. And she would wrestle with the controls, her muscles screaming with the effort. "Steady, steady. Watch the grav tide. It's pulling you in. Give me a 5-degree upward burn. Easy now." They flew for hours through the celestial maze, a desperate, high-stakes dance on the edge of a razor. Twice, they were nearly lost. A sudden gravimetric wave caught the Nemazan's stern, spinning them into a terrifying flat spin that Kai barely managed to correct. Later, a tendril of dark matter, invisible and silent, brushed against their port side, and the temperature of the hull on that side dropped to near absolute zero in seconds, causing metal plates to contract and buckle with a sound like a gunshot. Through it all, Alara began to feel a strange sense of exhilaration. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with a fierce, burning focus. She was no longer a passive keeper of relics. She was a pilot, a survivor, fighting for her life and the life of her ship with every fiber of her being. She was alive in a way she hadn't been in a decade. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they broke through. The chaos of the nebula fell away behind them, and they emerged into a pocket of serene, silent space. It was a small, self-contained star system, hidden in the heart of the maw, a celestial eye in the center of the storm. A single, small, white dwarf star cast a gentle, pearlescent light on a cluster of asteroids and one small, rocky planetoid. It was a place that did not exist on any official star chart, a perfect, secret harbor. "Welcome to the quiet." Kaylin's voice came over the comm, soft with relief and a touch of pride. "No one's been here in 50 years. Old pirate hideout from before the Conquered locked down the fringe. It's safe." As the Nemazan drifted toward the largest of the asteroids, a new alert chimed on Ilara's console. It wasn't an alarm, it was a notification from Kai. The AI had been running a deep diagnostic on the ship's systems, using the relative downtime of the journey to search for the root cause of their power failures. Librarian. Kai pulsed, and this time, its data stream was laced with something Alara had never felt from it before: fear. "I have found an anomaly in the dissonance engine's core programming. A subroutine I did not write. It is dormant, but it has a purpose." Ilara's blood ran cold. "What is it?" "It is a dead man's switch," Kai explained. "A failsafe. But it was not designed by my creators on Earth. The coding architecture is Concord military grade. It is a remotely activated self-destruct sequence designed to overload the dissonance engine and vaporize this ship and everything in a 10 million kilometer radius." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The Concord hadn't just forgotten about Earth and its relics. They knew. They must have known about the Nemazan, about her, about the weapon she carried. They hadn't come for her because they didn't need to. They had a leash on her the whole time. The probe wasn't an accident. It was a tripwire. It wasn't meant to call the fleet. It was meant to confirm her location so they could flip a switch and erase their last, inconvenient secret from a safe distance. The sterilization fleet was never coming. The threat was far more insidious. It was a single, encrypted command, already racing across the galaxy toward them. "How long do we have?" "Kai," she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "The command is likely piggybacking on the Concord Patrol vessel's communication burst," the AI calculated. "Based on their last known position and standard transmission speeds, the signal will reach this location in 12 hours. Kalen's voice cut in, sharp with alarm. "Librarian, what's going on? Your ship's energy signature just went haywire." Alara looked from her console to the view screen, where the vagrant was hovering patiently. This man, this scavenger, had led her to safety, only to bring her to her own execution chamber. It wasn't his fault, but the bitter irony was a knife in her gut. She had escaped the chorus, navigated the maw, and found a companion in the void, only to be undone by a ghost from a past she never knew she had. "Kalen," she said, her voice hollow. "The Concord isn't coming to hunt us. They're coming to bury us." The silence on the comm channel stretched for a full 10 seconds, an eternity in the void. In that silence, Alara could feel the fragile trust she had built with Kalen crystallizing into a single, sharp point of decision. He could run. He had every reason to. His ship was fast. His mission was complete. And the danger she represented had just escalated from theoretical to terminal. He could sever the connection, fire up his engines, and lose himself in the fringe, leaving her and her ghost ship to be silently erased from existence. It would be the smart play, the scavenger's play. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of all its earlier cynicism, leaving behind a core of something hard and unexpectedly solid. "How much of a leash?" "The kill switch is Concord military," Alara said, her own voice a monotone. A defense against the panic clawing at the edges of her mind. "A remote signal. Kai estimates it will arrive in just under 12 hours. Concord military," Kalen repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was a new, raw edge to his voice. "I used to be Concord military. Fleet logistics. 9th Sector Patrol. A long time ago." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I quit after they pacified the Hendrix Rebellion. That's what they called it. Pacification. They cracked the moon the colonists were living on and then redacted every report about it. Wrote it up as a geological disaster. That's their way. They don't just win. They rewrite the history books so the war never even happened." "So, you never even existed." The confession hung in the space between their ships, a bridge of shared history built on the lies of a common enemy. He wasn't just a scavenger who had stumbled upon a secret. He was a defector who had seen the truth and chosen to walk away. He understood the Concord's philosophy better than she ever could. They put a leash on you, librarian, because they were never just quarantining Earth, he continued, his voice hardening with conviction. They were burying their own shame. They let the chorus consume our world because they were too afraid to fight it. And your ship, your archives, they are the last living proof of their cowardice. They can't let that story be told. Then what do we do? Alara asked, the question a naked admission of her own helplessness. "We cut the leash," Kalen said, his tone shifting. The cynical pilot replaced by the focused logistics officer he once was. "That kill switch isn't magic," It's a piece of hardware, a receiver wired into the dissonance engine's control system. If we can find it, we can physically disconnect it. It's a long shot, but it's the only one we've got." He paused, and she could hear the faint tapping of keys as he pulled up schematics on his end. "Kai, give me the Mnemosyne's original blueprints. Cross-reference them with standard Concord black box architecture from 10 years ago. Look for any modification, any piece of hardware that doesn't belong." Kai's consciousness, though weary, surged with renewed purpose. Data streams flowed between the two ships. On Ilara's main screen, a three-dimensional wireframe of the Mnemosyne appeared, rotating slowly. Seconds later, a small section near the aft engine housing glowed red. It was an auxiliary processing unit, tucked away behind a radiation shield, a component that wasn't on the original Terran designs. "There you are. You son of a bitch," Kalen muttered. "It's on the outer hull. We have to go outside." The plan was as simple as it was terrifying. An EVA, a spacewalk on the hull of a crippled ship against a ticking clock, to perform delicate brain surgery on a doomsday device. Kalen would have to come aboard the Mnemosyne. There was no other way. He docked the Vagrant with a gentle precision that belied the ship's battered appearance. When the airlock hissed open, Ilara stood waiting. Seeing him in person was a shock. He was older than his voice suggested, his face a roadmap of hard-lived years, with tired, intelligent eyes that had seen too much. He moved with an economy of motion, a man who wasted nothing, not energy, not words, not time. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. They simply nodded. Two soldiers meeting on a battlefield they hadn't chosen. They suited up in silence. The EVA suits were old, the seals stiff, but they held pressure. As they stood in the airlock, ready to vent the atmosphere, Kalen looked over at her, his face visible through his helmet's visor. "Whatever happens out there, librarian, it's been an honor hearing your story." "The story's not over yet," she replied, her voice steady in his comms. The world outside was breathtakingly, terrifyingly beautiful. They were floating in the serene heart of the nebula. The quiet, the gentle light of the white dwarf bathed the hull of the Mnemosyne in a soft, ethereal glow, making the scorched metal and jagged wounds from their journey look like the ancient scars on a sleeping giant beyond their peaceful bubble. The chaotic colors of the serpent's maw churned in silent fury. They were on the edge of a precipice, a tiny island of calm in a sea of cosmic violence. Tethered to the ship, they moved across the hull. Kalen led, his mag boots clamping securely to the metal, a plasma cutter and a set of diagnostic tools clipped to his belt. Ilara followed, her role to provide light and to call out the ship's structural weaknesses, the places where a misstep could send a piece of the buckled hull spinning off into the void. The red-marked panel was in a precarious spot, right beside the flickering, unstable containment field of the main engine. Waves of heat and radiation washed over them in invisible tides. "Kai," Ilara said, her voice tight. "How much time?" 3 hours, 7 minutes. The AI responded, its voice a calm, steady presence in their ears. Kalen got to work, slicing through the outer plating with the plasma cutter. The work was slow, painstaking. Underneath the first plate was a tangle of wiring and conduits, and nestled among them, a small, black box, no bigger than his fist, with a single, faintly pulsing blue light. It was sleek, featureless, and utterly alien against the ship's older, more utilitarian technology. That's it, he breathed. The receiver. He attached a diagnostic probe, and his helmet's HUD lit up with scrolling lines of Concord encryption. It's locked down tight. Active counter-intrusion software. If I try to force it, it'll probably trigger the detonation sequence early. What's the alternative? I have to talk to it, he said, his fingers flying across the keypad on his wrist. I have to convince it I'm one of them. It's a handshake protocol. I just need to find the right password. For 2 agonizing hours, he worked, throwing every old Concord code and bypass key he could remember at the machine. Each attempt was met with a negative response, the blue light on the box pulsing a little faster, a little more insistently. The clock was ticking. The margin for error was gone. 1 hour remaining. Kai announced, "It's not working." Kalen growled in frustration, pulling his hand back from the panel. The protocols have changed too much. I'm locked out. Ilara looked from the stubborn black box to the vast, indifferent starfield. They had come so far. A thought sparked in her mind, a desperate, intuitive leap. You're trying to beat it like a soldier, she said. But you told me yourself. They're not soldiers. They're librarians of a different sort. They don't destroy history. They curate it. They redact it. What's the one word that sums up their entire philosophy? Kalen looked at her, his eyes widening in understanding behind his visor. He turned back to the keypad and slowly, deliberately, typed in a single 9-letter word, quarantine. The blue light on the receiver flickered once, turned green, and then went dark. A wave of diagnostic text scrolled across Kalen's HUD. Administrative override accepted. Receiver deactivated. They floated in stunned silence, the sound of their own ragged breathing the only thing in their comms. They had done it. They had cut the leash. Signal from Conquer patrol vessel has just reached the edge of the nebula, Kai reported, its tone flat and factual. No detonation has occurred. A laugh, raw and full of relief, burst from Kalen. He reached across the small space between them and clasped her gloved hand. In that single, shared touch, a decade of loneliness and a lifetime of cynicism dissolved into the quiet of the stars. Back on the bridge, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound and weary certainty. They were safe, but they were not free. The Concorde would know the signal had failed. They would send another, or they would finally send the fleet. Hiding was no longer enough. The mission had to change. Ilara stood before the main view screen, looking not at the stars, but at the reflection of the two of them standing side by side on the bridge. You wanted to know the story of Earth, she said to Kalen, and I thought my job was just to keep that story safe. But I was wrong. She turned to him, her eyes burning with a new fire. A story that isn't told is just another kind of silence. A memory that isn't shared is a ghost. The Concorde wants to bury the truth. So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to set it free. Kalen raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? Librarian. The Mimosini can do more than just store data, she said, a fierce smile touching her lips for the first time. Its communication array was designed to broadcast on every known frequency. A last, desperate attempt to call for help. We're going to use it. We're not just going to run. We're going to broadcast. The plan settled between them, audacious and insane. They would become pirates of a different sort, not stealing cargo, but disseminating truth. They would use the archives and Kai's vast consciousness to send out packets of Earth's history, its art, its music, its science, and the true, unredacted story of its fall to every independent system, every listening post, every forgotten colony in the fringe. They would create their own dissonance, not of psychic chaos, but of undeniable truth, a weapon against an empire built on lies. The Mnemosyne, patched with parts scavenged from the vagrant, was no longer just a library. It was a printing press. It was a pirate radio station broadcasting from the heart of a storm. Kalen took the pilot's seat, his hands moving across the controls with a newfound sense of purpose. Ilara stood at the communications console, Kai's consciousness a silent partner beside her. "What should we send first?" Kalen asked, looking over at her. "The history of the fall, the Concord's betrayal." Ilara shook her head. "No," she said softly. "We'll start with something smaller, something they can't possibly call a weapon." She queued up a file, a simple sensory memory from the archives. "Kai, open a channel, all frequencies. Unencrypted. Across the lawless spaces of the outer fringe, on 100 different worlds and 1,000 different ships, a signal suddenly appeared. It carried no words, no warnings, no declarations of war. It was just a feeling. The cool, clean scent of wet earth and ozone. The gentle drumming sound of water on a roof. The quiet, profound, and beautiful sensation of the first spring rain on a world that was now only a memory. The ghost ship and the scavenger, the last librarian and the repentant soldier, turned their vessel toward the roiling, chaotic mouth of the nebula. They were heading back out into the galaxy, not as fugitives, but as messengers. They were impossibly outgunned, impossibly outnumbered, and hunted by the greatest power in the galaxy. But they had a story to tell, and for the first time in a decade, the library was open.